All right, welcome to the review session. In today's explainer, we're jumping right in to dissect what a lot of economists are calling a literal ticking time bomb, and that is the United States national debt. We're taking the massive, super complex world of macroeconomics and breaking it down into a really clear visual exam review. So grab your mental highlighters, because understanding this dynamic is absolutely crucial for grasping exactly where our economy is heading. The ultimate boogeyman we need to understand today is this staggering figure, $39 trillion. That's the current national debt, and it is on pace to hit $50 trillion by 2030. But what's really mind-bending here is that this number is currently growing by $6 billion every single day. It's a number so huge it almost loses its meaning, right? But the mechanics behind how it's managed are going to directly impact your wallet. So here's our syllabus for the explainer today. We've got 1, the debt spiral crisis. 2, 3 ways out. 3, the 1940s historical fix. 4, financial repression. And 5, personal savings impact. Okay, starting off with Section 1, the debt spiral crisis, which is a pretty dangerous cycle. Let's actually break down the mechanics of our current financial dilemma. The massive debt balance itself isn't actually the biggest problem right off the bat. The real issue is the interest rate environment we're currently living in, which creates this incredibly dangerous debt spiral. For a really long time, the US borrowed absurd amounts of money almost for free, just because interest rates were so incredibly low. But then inflation rose, and interest rates went up to around 4 to 5%. Now, higher interest rates on an enormous principal balance force the government to borrow increasingly more money just to cover the resulting deficit, which of course creates more debt, higher interest payments, and the cycle just aggressively repeats itself. To put that spiral into perspective, check out this projection from the Congressional Budget Office. They project that annual interest payments alone are going to hit $2.1 trillion by 2036. To give you a sense of scale, that single line item is enough to completely wipe out our entire national defense budget. This is exactly why there is so much pressure on the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates, basically to allow the government to refinance this debt and save massive, massive amounts of money. Moving on to Section 2, 3 methods to manage debt, basically our options to fix the crisis. Now, if you're taking an exam on macroeconomics, you absolutely have to know these 3 multiple-choice options the government realistically faces for fixing the debt. Option A is austerity. This means raising taxes and drastically cutting spending. It's the responsible adult solution, but practically speaking, it's pretty much politically impossible because nobody wants to vote for higher taxes and fewer services, right? Option B is defaulting, just admitting you can't pay. For the United States, which holds the world's reserve currency and anchors global pensions and institutions, this would be financially devastating and is highly unlikely. So that clearly shows why policymakers lean so heavily toward the magic third option, inflation. By letting prices rise, you effectively shrink the real value of the debt, allowing you to pay back yesterday's borrowing with tomorrow's less valuable dollars. All right, Section 3, the 1940s historical precedent, which is a proven playbook. This isn't just some theoretical concept. It's a proven historical strategy. We've actually run this exact same playbook before. If we compare the post-World War II economy to today, we see almost identical conditions. Back then, an absurd amount of money was borrowed to fund the war, pushing the debt to roughly 106% of GDP. Everyone was wondering how it would ever be paid off. Well, the solution? The Federal Reserve, pressured by the Treasury, simply pegged interest rates at artificially low levels, like 2.5% for long-term bonds, just to keep the government afloat. If you're taking notes, underline this next concept. This strategy is called financial repression. It was the mathematical secret weapon to getting out of the 1940s debt crisis. And while it did lead to some runaway inflation, up to 10% annualized at times, it successfully dropped the debt-to-GDP ratio all the way down to 23% by 1974. The math is undeniable here. Financial repression, not strict budgeting, was the engine that actually eroded the post-war debt. Which brings us to Section 4, the mechanics of financial repression and its modern execution. So the crucial point is how this policy is actually executed in modern times. How do you implement financial repression today without triggering an immediate economic panic? Well, let's impartially review the theories proposed by Fed Chair Pick Kevin Warsh. His thesis seems a little backwards at first glance, but the logic is this. He believes the Fed needs to shrink its massive $6.6 trillion balance sheet. Right now, the Fed actually pays banks interest not to spend their massive cash reserves, which is an ongoing expense. Warsh's theory is that by shrinking the balance sheet and stopping these payments to banks, you remove distortions from the system. This projects stability, which shrinks risk premiums and allows interest rates to come down naturally without causing inflation to spiral. Add in the wild card of artificial intelligence driving faster economic growth without inflation, and the plan is to literally grow and inflate our way out of the math problem. To make this abstract concept of inflation and debt erosion incredibly visceral, just imagine you owed a $10,000 debt back in 1960. Back then, that was almost the price of an entire house. It was a massive burden. But today, that exact same $10,000 debt barely covers 3 months of median rent. The numerical debt didn't change at all, but your eroded purchasing power made it laughably easy to pay off over time. This is exactly what the government wants to do with its $39 trillion balance. But here's the trick, right? A huge part of making financial repression work on paper is managing the public perception of inflation. And that brings us to substitution bias. This is an official inflation calculation method that assumes when prices rise, you're naturally going to switch to cheaper alternatives. Basically, this means if steak gets way too expensive, the data assumes, hey, you'll just buy chicken instead to save money. So the inflation metrics measure what you can now afford, the chicken, which conveniently prints a lower food inflation number than the actual pain you're feeling at the grocery store. It effectively measures survival, not your standard of living. Another essential exam concept for understanding how data is managed is hedonic adjustment. This is where the government offsets price increases in the data by factoring in improved product quality. For example, if a new car is vastly more expensive today, the data might say, well, it has new backup cameras, better airbags, and higher efficiency. Therefore, they mathematically adjust the inflation downward, claiming you are just getting more bang for your buck. Because lower reported inflation saves the government hundreds of billions in interest payments, there's obviously a massive financial incentive for those numbers to skew downward. Okay, final module. Section 5, Impact on Personal Savings and Why Your Wealth is at Risk. We've reached the most critical part of our explainer today. How does this massive macroeconomic shift directly impact your personal wealth? The key takeaway for your personal finances is summarized perfectly in this quote regarding the 1940s playbook. Yes, financial repression fixed the government's debt problem, but it was at the profound expense of everyday savers. Think about it. If you hold a bond or a savings account paying you 3% interest, but real inflation is secretly running at 6%, you are actually earning a negative return. This strategy is effectively a silent wealth transfer from citizens holding cash to the government holding debt. So as you prepare for the real world, the source material points out that you should expect to see these 3 trends manifest. First, expect increased taxes, likely targeted at higher earners to help close that deficit gap. Second, anticipate subtle, quiet money printing through Fed policies that keep rates artificially low. And third, prepare for official economic data, like CPI and job reports, that becomes increasingly difficult to align with your actual daily spending experience. And that right there brilliantly illustrates why we review these macro concepts. I'm going to leave you with one final, absolutely vital question to test your understanding. Based on everything we've just reviewed, the debt spiral, financial repression, and substitution bias, how safe is it to simply sit on a pile of uninvested cash? If the entire system is designed to slowly erode the value of money just to save the national balance sheet, what is your strategy to make sure your wealth isn't the one paying the bill? Think about that one and keep studying.